Hello, and welcome to Roly Poly Weight Loss. I'm your host, Roly Poly, and welcome to day 22. And today is a weigh-in day, so let's see how that is going. Okay. 270.0. Okay, not bad. I'm coming back down from that high week, so I'll take it. So, today we're going back to our routine, so let me start the timer. Okay, so today I want to talk about step tracking. Now, if you're like me, I'm sure you've heard that you're supposed to walk 10,000 steps a day. Many fitness trackers, including my Fitbit, have that as the default setting. So it seems pretty important, right? Now, if you're coming from a sedentary place, like many roly-poly people, 10,000 steps just seems like a huge number. I was certainly not hitting that number when I first started walking. In fact, I set my first Fitbit at 5,000 steps, and I worked up to getting to that number, then 6,000, then 7,000, and there are still plenty of days when I don't hit 7,000. So I can even take a half-hour walk and still not hit 7,000 in a day. That's how high that number is. Now, when I was working at my more active job and climbing all those stairs I've mentioned, I was usually hitting 6K consistently, and with a little effort I could hit 7K in a day. But on the other hand, if I had the day off, and I spent, my only time that day was spent going between bed and couch and kitchen, then it would be, 1,000, maybe. So I also, as I've mentioned, walked 5Ks, which are 3.1 miles, 5 kilometers. And if you have a particularly sedentary day, only hitting like 1,000 or 2,000 steps, that hour of walking to hit a 5K will bump you up to 7. At least it did for me. But I could only hit 10,000 steps if I was, up on my feet all day. If it was like a day when we were just doing a ton of errand running, shopping, I had to be on my feet for a large portion of the day, or if I, walked a 10K, the couple of times I've done that, something like that. That's really what it took to get me up to 10K, was it would be a busy, exhausting day to get to 10,000 steps. And in fact, Roly Mama, she still has 5,000 steps as her goal, because she isn't doing those long walks, and that's a reasonable goal for her to hit in a day, provided she does her half-hour walk or is doing some, chores or errands or something that gets her active. So, that said, hearing, we should all walk 10,000 steps, I was like, that seems a little unreasonable. That's more than a 5K. Is that really what I need to be doing every day? Well, according to the Mayo Clinic, our numbers are pretty typical. They said the average American walks 3,000 to 4,000 steps a day, or roughly 1.5 to 2 miles. It's a good idea to find out how many steps a day you walk now as your own baseline. Then you can work up toward the goal of 10,000 steps by aiming to add 1,000 extra steps a day every 2 weeks. If you're already walking more than 10,000 steps a day, or if you're fairly active and trying to lose weight, you'll probably want to set your daily step goal higher. So, they say that what we're doing is typical, but they're still encouraging us to get to that 10,000 steps. Okay, and self pushes it even further. Fitness pros have been citing 12,000 steps as a new target, which begs the question, is 10,000 steps just not good enough anymore? They interviewed 2 trainers who encouraged people to aim for 12,000 instead of 10,000 steps a day. Which, again, I have to work to hit 7, especially now that I'm not at my active job. So, MyFitnessPal sums up the issue pretty well. When you're just starting an exercise program, you may not have the confidence or ability to get anywhere near 10,000 steps, even if you go for daily walks. This lofty goal might backfire, as consistently falling short of your goals may discourage you from exercising. If you swim or cycle, those activities don't register as steps, so your count for the day won't accurately reflect in your activity level. Plus, if you get 10,000 steps just from walking to and from work, you may feel best when you get 15,000 or 20,000 steps per day instead of stopping at 10,000. Ultimately, tracking step count is highly individual and there's no perfect number. So, we should be aiming for higher, but some people should be aiming for even higher than that. But they do say to start with lower goals, and that's something we talked about before. Setting a really high goal that you know is impossible, you're not going to achieve it, you're setting yourself up for failure. So, we've looked at research in the past that I've talked about here that says that a half-hour a day walk is what we need to become more healthy in an ideal world, 150 minutes a week, which is a half-hour walk 5 times a week. Water time. So, if that only equals about 3,500, 4,000 steps, do we really need to work up to hitting 10,000 steps a day? I mean, that's 3 of those half-hour walks every single day. You hit your weekly count in 2 days. And they're saying to do that 7 days a week. And 12, that's even higher. Which again, if you're like a waitress or someone who spends the entire day on your feet, you might already hit that. You might need a higher than 10 number, but for those of us who are nowhere close to that, I mean, when you're coming from a sedentary place, that just seems insane. And it's just, waiting for us to fail, it feels like. So even the idea from the Mayo Clinic where they said add 1,000 steps a day, it seems a pretty steep incline. I mean, that's, an extra, 15 minutes of walking every day. Just to hit 1,000 on what you're already doing. So instead of a half-hour walk, do a 45. And then the next day, do a 60. And then the next day, I mean, you can be up to walking like for 4 hours. So I wonder, do we really need to hit that target and that quickly? Well, thankfully, it seems like the answer is no. And kind of yes. So let's start with the no. First, let's look at where this 10,000 step number came from, right? Some scientific study, right? This article from The Atlantic actually gets to the origin of this number. In 1965, a Japanese company was selling pedometers, and they gave it a name that, in Japanese, means the 10,000 step meter. Based on conversations she's had with Japanese researchers, Lee believes that name was chosen for the product because the character for 10,000 looks sort of like a man walking. As far as she knows, the actual health merits of that number have never been validated by research. So yeah, that's it. That's where the 10,000 step number comes from. No science, just marketing and aesthetics. That's it. That's where that number started from. So now let's look at the kind of sort of yes. So since then, since that number magically appeared in the 60s, people have actually initiated studies that seem to validate it. But Self points out a problem with that. It's important to note that while research in this area can provide interesting insight, there are some limitations. For example, if a study only looks at the benefits of 10,000 steps and doesn't compare it to other step counts, the research can't conclude how much better 10,000 steps is for a specific health outcome, or if there's even a difference at all. So that is like a really good point. I mean, if we already established that some people hit 10,000 naturally just in their day, and they might still be overweight because that's just where they're at. And so for them, hitting 10,000 isn't going to change anything. They might need to hit 15. And then there's people who are starting at 1 going up to 10. And you don't know if they would have been okay going up to 5 instead of 10. For example, in one study, overweight participants were asked to walk 10,000 steps daily for 12 weeks. The 30 participants who consistently reached that goal lost weight and had a decrease in anxiety, depression, anger, and fatigue. So, aside from the fact that a pool of 30 people is insanely tiny to draw data from, although in researching this, I found a pool of 10. This study doesn't seem to have tested other areas. Again, maybe people who hit 7,000 steps consistently also had less weight, anxiety, and fatigue, just not as much as the 10s. And for that matter, were those 10s coming from like 1,000 or 5,000 or 8,000 steps a day to begin with? We don't know. So it's not as robust information as it could be. So similarly, a study where 355 participants were asked to take more than 10,000 steps a day found that there was a decrease in blood pressure among participants after 6 months, which is great news. But again, there doesn't seem to be any control group at a lower step count showing if that would have also resulted in a decrease. And it doesn't tell you where they started from or how much over the 10 they did. We just don't know. And that's important for a number of reasons, as The Atlantic points out. That nuance can mean a lot to people who want to be less sedentary, but aren't sure how to start, or whether they can do enough to make a difference, says Lindsay Wilson, a clinical professor of geriatric medicine at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. I don't think setting the bar at 10,000 steps is a very successful way to approach exercise, she says. Some people are not walkers. They don't have safe neighborhoods, or they feel unsteady on sidewalks. You need to be more creative. Is this a person who needs to go to a gym class or the pool or sit on a stationary bike? Okay, and self-ads. It also depends on what other activities you're doing in a day. If you take an indoor cycling class or do a strength training workout, you may not rack up as many steps as you would if you went for a run or walked a lot in one day. That doesn't mean you're being unhealthy or that the other activities you're doing don't count, especially if you're hitting those 75 minutes of vigorous activity per week. And I found this out for myself. So the entirety of last week, I was doing weight training, strength training exercises instead of cardio. So even though I could put in a half an hour of working out and be panting and sweating and feeling the burn, I had maybe 200 steps for that half hour period. Maybe. So there, was that being unhealthy? No. Was that racking up steps? No. So this begs the question, are there any studies that look at lower step counts or a variation in step counts or just being more active in general? And it turns out the answer is yes. For example, Self notes, one study showed that participants who reached 7,500 steps or more were less likely to report poor sleep, while those who reached 5,000 steps or fewer were more likely to report poor sleep. Okay, so there's progress. That's looking at 5,000 and 7,500 steps. And there's a difference there, that those people didn't necessarily need to get to 10 to have better sleep, just 7,500. Okay, good news. So that's just a small increment. And that's promising to those of us who are looking to incrementally increase our activity. Harvard professor I-Min Lee performed a study observing the step totals and mortality rates of more than 16,000 elderly American women. So again, sample size of 30, sample size of 16,000. Now again, elderly American women, so there are other groups, younger people, men, etc., that this does not take into consideration, but the results are still applicable that you can see. As she explained to The Atlantic, the basic finding was that at 4,400 steps per day, these women had significantly lower mortality rates compared to the least active women, Lee explains. If they did more, their mortality rates continued to drop until they reached about 7,500 steps, at which point the rates leveled out, ultimately increasing daily physical activity by as little as 2,000 steps. Less than a mile of walking was associated with positive health outcomes for the elderly women. So they had, I believe, 5 groups. They started down at 2,000, so that's what she's saying, from 2,000 to 4,400. Just that 2,000 step increase made a difference. So there you have it. If you are the kind of person who struggles to get to 5,000 steps, let alone 10, don't feel like you're a failure. Getting to 4,400 showed a benefit, up from 2. So, hitting what you can, as long as you're increasing at all, would seem to have benefits. So she continues, I'm not saying don't get 10,000 steps. If you can get 10,000 steps, more power to you, says Lee. But if you're someone who's sedentary, even a very modest increase brings you significant health benefits. So, there you have it. If you want to aim for 10, and it's achievable without killing yourself to aim for 10, aim for 10. If you're like, 5 is pushing it, aim for 5. If 5 is kind of easy, but 10's out of reach, aim for 7. Pick a goal that is more active than you are now, but don't be pigeonholed into that 10,000 steps that just might seem so unachievable. So, all of that said, what can you do if you do want to increase your daily step count? Tracking your steps on a pedometer or fitness tracker can help. And adding a half-hour daily walk, like we did for No Zero Day May, can certainly boost your numbers. If you're in the moderate area, 6,000 to 8,000, you should consider this app I really like. It's called StepBet. It looks at your past activity, and it calculates an active and a stretch goal for you. Now, actives at minimum are 7,000. So even if you only hit like 4,000 a day average, your active day goal will be 7,000. So that's why I say if you're in the moderate area, if you're down in the like 3,000 to 5,000 area, it's not necessarily the best thing for you, but you can work up to it. But actives, 7,000 minimum, and stretch days, 9,000 minimum. So 9 could be a little hard, but you can achieve it. So once you have those numbers calculated, then you join a bet. It usually costs about $30 to $40 to enter, $30 to $40. And the standard format is 6 weeks, the first one being kind of a trial week. You can't be eliminated. You need to hit your stretch goal twice. There's that 9,000 twice. Your active goal 4 times a week. And then you have one free day where you can have 0 steps. And if you can make those numbers for the whole time, 6 weeks, you win a chunk of the pot. So there are also like variations. There's a shorter like 4-week bet. There's ones with no stretch days. There's ones with all stretch days. No free days. All kinds of things. They have a ton of variations. And I loved doing these because it was a great motivation to get that last 1,000 steps in before bed if I was a little low. And there were days where, you know, I'd hit 7 and it was like, oh, I need a stretch day for this week. I have to go up to 9. I need to go take a walk. That on those days where I had maybe just naturally come close to 7, I had to then push myself to go be active more to get to 9. And the extra money at the end was nice. Sometimes I only made like $2 back over my bet, over my 30 or 40, but sometimes I made 10. And the great thing was that they guarantee your money. So if you win your bet, if you make it to the end hitting your required number of active and stretch days, okay, you always get at least your money back. So if there are a large number of people who won that particular bet, enough that it doesn't cover it, they will forego their own cut to make sure that all winners at least make their own money back. So if you can hit your goals, you don't lose anything. So you might not win anything extra, but at least you don't lose unless you miss your goals. And I mean, there's days where I lost a step bet because it was, you know, 10 minutes to midnight and I had 12 minutes worth of walking left to get done because I had been too busy doing other things that day that weren't active and I just hadn't paid attention and didn't realize how close I was to bedtime and just lost it. It happens. If you get injured, like by breaking your toe, you can send them that, and they will take you out and not charge you. They will let you back out for medical reasons, which is when I stopped doing it regularly. Cool down. Was when I broke my toe and I had to stop for medical, and I just didn't get back into it right away because I was moving. So if you do complete the steps, you can't lose. And as you finish step bets and you become more active and your active and stretch goals inch higher, it's a great way to slowly, over a month, not a day, increase your step goals. And I'm talking like 200-300 steps, not 1,000. Again, however, the minimums are 7,000 and 9,000 steps. So if you're just hitting 5 a day comfortably and stretching to 6, this might push you too far. Like for Rolling Mama, this would be basically doubling her numbers. And that's a recipe for failure or for pain. But if you still want a little extra stepping motivation, but step bet isn't right for you, check out Charity Miles. Regardless of your step count level, it will work for you. You pick a charity you want to support from their list, start up the tracker, and get walking, or running, or biking, or whatever. They track all kinds of activities now. And when you finish, their corporate sponsors will donate money to the charity of your choice. So it's like if you've ever done those walks in the past where someone sponsored you to do a walk or whatever, this is like that. They are sponsoring you to do your activity, and you can do it every single day, whatever your activity is. Your half an hour, no zero day May walks. You can have Charity Miles donate money on your behalf for those. And you can even join teams and help support or compete against each other. There's a great sense of community there. And there are all kinds of charities on the list. And if there's a charity that you want to support that you don't see there, they have a way to add charities. I think the charity itself has to do it, but there's a whole way to do it. I know when I first started, there were like 10 charities. And now there's a bunch. So that's a great way to add extra motivation to getting your daily exercise or steps. And as you heard, that's it for today. So this has been Roly Poly Weight Loss. As always, I am your host, Roly Poly. Please share your experiences with the hashtag step count. You can even share your step goals or achievements. I'd love to see them. If you have an app like Fitbit that gives you a little badge for hitting a certain level, please share it. I love to cheer that kind of thing. I will share mine. So, join the community with your step counts or activity counts. And please join me next time.